Hello and welcome to another episode of the Power Law Investor. Today is August 25th, 2025, a Monday. And as I write this, Bitcoin is trading at 112.5K and Kaspa is just above 8.5 cents. And in today's episode, I want to give you guys an update on the Kaspa PAI, but I also want us to understand, or want you guys to understand, what is the logic behind following this sort of strategy. And it starts off with the power law for Bitcoin, moves on to the Kaspa PAI. And then I also want to talk about why this can be applied to other assets. And I want to illustrate that by showing you what the results have obtained on Ethereum. These are preliminary results, but it is looking pretty interesting. And I want to share that with you guys. And as always, this is not financial advice. All right, so do your own research. So quickly, let's look back at the power law. The power law for Bitcoin comes from this graph, which is basically taking the log of time in the x-axis and the log of price in the y-axis. And when we plot that, we end up with a really strong trend line with an r-squared of 0.967. That means it's very linear. 96% of the variation in this line is explained by this equation. If we then make the assumption that this equation holds going forward, which it has for about 15 years, then we can make a prediction about price. And that's where this sort of thing comes in, right? When we convert it to the linear domain, so this is time, and linear price, we end up with this sort of rising graph. This is called a power law curve, right? It's derived from the power law. It can be represented by this equation over here. Now we say, okay, what happens 1 year from now if we go ahead and make these predictions if the trend line continues? We do that, we end up with the price of Bitcoin at 177K, which is about 50% higher than where it is right now, which is about 113 on this graph anyway. So 50% returns are fantastic, right? And we know that it has mathematically been following this. We don't know if the future is going to be like the past, but we can make some assumptions and weigh our bets accordingly. Okay, so if you have that, then we know Bitcoin is going to go up to this number. But this is a trend line. It is not the absolute value that it's following through. You can see it on this log. It goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. And turns out that every 4 years, the price seems to jump way above the trend line. So you had a jump up here, 2017, 2021, and now 2025. And so the idea is, if the price is jumping up for Bitcoin, then the price of other related crypto assets will take off, right? And with that in mind, I developed the PAI. The PAI tells us that when the trend of the market is going to be going up, these blue points are a good time to buy, right? So the logic chain is, we know Bitcoin's going up. We see Bitcoin go crazy every 4 years. We think that's going to happen this year. And if that happens, this sort of system works fantastically, right? So you've got this macro overview of what's happening in terms of the Bitcoin power law and the residuals, that is the minuses and pluses from that trend line. We then can use this tool, which I've developed, to figure out what would be good times to buy. Now, this is for Kaspa. And for Kaspa, this is a signal that goes all the way from 0 to 1. It allows you to time the market in terms of finding reasonable prices compared to the asset's own history, even if the history is relatively short. So for Kaspa, we've got about 1,000 days or so. That's much less than Bitcoin, which is more than 5x the amount. But still, we can make a good argument that the PAI does a fantastic job of finding these low points. Is it 100% accurate? No. But it's learning as it goes through its history. So now with the PAI, let's say for July 2024, the number it generates is only based on what's happened in the past. So these numbers are the same as if you had a time machine and we went back in time. These would be numbers that we would generate. And based around that, we would find great buying opportunities around 11 cents over here, and then 8 cents over here, and then all the way down to the identification of 7 cents over here, or even lower than that. Zoom in and we can say, oh, it was triggering at 6 cents or so, right? So using that sort of technique, I was able to show that depending on what sort of risk metric you choose, right? So if you choose whatever the risk metric that whatever level you feel comfortable at, you can go ahead and get prices at a great discount, up to 25% of a discount from buying DCA, going DCA every day, right? And so that gives us a really strong indicator that this is working for Caspa, that we have a good opportunity. But now I wanted to take this methodology because this methodology is independent of the mathematics of the power law. We're using the power law for Bitcoin as an overall macro framework. And then at the more tactical level, we are using the PAI. I wanted to find out what it's going to look like in terms of other assets. But right now, let's just finish off with Kaspa. I'm getting ahead of myself because I'm excited about this. Kaspa is at a PAI of at a PAI of 0.322, 32 out of 1. And so it is not an amazing time to buy. And the way that we can think about this is this particular graph tells us over here how much time it spends in each of the colors. And this is the cumulative distribution. So it says how much has it spent below 0.2, for example. So it's the sum of 14.1 and 5.8, which is 19.9. And basically for me, for my risk level and my tolerance, I want something that's in the bottom 20% of the price range that it's been on, right? And what this is telling us, that bottom 20% is going to be at about 6.5 cents. And right now it's about 8.5 cents, right? Yeah, a little above 8.5 cents. So from that perspective, it still isn't in the price that I would find attractive. Now, everyone's case is different. I already have some Kaspa, and therefore I'm only going to add to it at advantageous prices. Now, if I hadn't deployed my bag already and then developed or deployed my capital and hadn't developed this sort of methodology, I would be waiting for a 0.2 to buy. But I've already deployed a majority of the capital that I had allocated to this, right? So if I'm going to add to it, it's got to be under great circumstances. And I know that the 0.2 level, that only happens maybe about 20% of the time. So maybe I get that price now, maybe I don't get that price, because we know, according to the power law, that prices are going to shoot up sooner or later, right? Because it happens every 4 years. So if Bitcoin takes off, it is a reasonable assumption. If Bitcoin takes off, the altcoin market would also take off, and Kaspa would be part of that, right? So with that perspective in mind, you guys can see that for each individual investor, you can decide what is a reasonable risk level for you to engage in buying or increasing your holdings, depending on your risk tolerance and what you're looking to do. All right. So with that in mind, I also wanted to investigate, and again, the price of Kaspa right now is at 0.87. It's not a great time to buy, but it's not a terrible time to buy either. You're looking at like the bottom 40-ish% or so, I would say, right? So 0.3 would give, yeah. So you're looking at about the bottom 40% of the time, right? So it's higher, 1.5 times the 40%, that'll give you to 100%. So not the best odds for me personally, but you might have a different view if you think the market's about to blow up and go up big time. So I also wanted to take the PAI methodology and start calibrating it and adapting it because it requires a fair bit of work to different assets. And the asset that I really wanted to talk about, and these are preliminary results right now, is Ethereum. And if you look at this, you can see that the PAI does a pretty good job of identifying what good buying opportunities are, because you can see at the bottoms, it's gone pretty blue, right? And what it's telling us is if you're looking at the bottom 20% or so, you're looking for, again, up to the 0.2 range or so, or maybe 0.2 here is the cumulative one. So maybe 0.25 or something like that. And if you look at that 0.25 range, it would have triggered that and lower. It would have fired in all these times over here in the recent past, right? So in the recent past, just over here in April, the PAI would have triggered, let's zoom into it so we can see it more clearly. It would have started triggering in the light blue region, or the medium blue region, at about between 2000 and 1900, so maybe around 2000. And then would have kept on triggering all the way down to the bottom till about 1500. And then it would have stopped triggering once we reached about 1800 or 2200 on the upper end, right? So you can see, just based on this intuitive, just a quick analysis of this, I can see that it would have identified good buying opportunities. And historically also, especially over here, you can see that Ethereum really was a good opportunity. But it was at a different part in the macro cycle over here. So it was in 22. So because we have the power law from Bitcoin, we know that the year after the halving and the year after that, the year after the halving, things are going to take off, and the year after that, you generally have a crash. So that insight would have gotten us to be very careful about investing in Ethereum in 2022. But now we're in 2025. We know that the momentum is upward. That's what it has been for the last few times with Bitcoin. And we can use that to know that the PAI is going to be effective. And these are buying opportunities. And it's identifying clearly what the buying opportunities are. So based on this, if you're looking at the 20% mark for Ethereum, you're looking at 1870 as a buying point. That's for today. And of course, we don't know if we're going to get that price, but this does give us a pretty useful guide indicator in telling us when are good times to buy relatively, right? So it's working not only for Kaspa, but it's also working now for Ethereum with the appropriate modifications. And so I wanted to share that with you guys. Please comment below if you would be interested in looking at Ethereum more in depth, and if there are other assets that you might be interested in. So that's all for now. Please go ahead, like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next one.